Okay, so I'm gonna get started doing the LED tail light, showing you tools that I'm using: heat gun, air body saw, some epoxy, clippers and strippers, the tail light itself, heat shrink, and the tail light housing. And hopefully we'll end up like that when we're done. So this is what the light looks like. We need to separate the case from the lens. I'm going to use the heat gun, heat it up around the perimeter. I stuck a knife in between the two of them and pried it apart. There's a thin layer of adhesive around the outside edge. It's not too big of a deal to get hot enough to pop off. Next thing I do is take the heat gun and rotate this around 360 degrees over and over with some gloves on. Get it hot on that edge, and then use the putty knife, stick right in between the two of them, and you got to work at it a little bit, but it'll pop right off. And there's the adhesive. You don't have to get it super hot, it comes apart. Next thing, there's these little flared pieces of the plastic that are sticking up. Those poke through the board, and I shave those off with a razor blade, and then the board will separate from the housing. So I got those little flared pieces of plastic cut off. You use the wire clippers, cut those off, and separate this. And the next thing I did is I took my wire strippers, stripped these wires back, and then I'm going to chop this plug off and strip these wires, and then I'll use some connectors and connect the two together. I have my wires ready to splice together. I use these connectors, they're called solder sleeves. Just use the heat gun, the heat shrinks down, and the solder melts. Really good for making small connections. Then what I'm going to do is take the lens and lay it on the top of here. Line it up so the LEDs show in the bottom. Now I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to mark it approximately here and here and here and here to make my cuts. I'm going to make lines down here and make those cuts to cut this off so you get the width. This is how wide the board is, so that's how wide I cut the lens. And then I'll do the same thing for the top and the bottom. You can see, cut those outside edges all off. Got my lines drawn, and I'm going to cut these off with the air body saw. Little thin blade. Imagine you could use a cut-off wheel or jigsaw, something like that also. Okay, so I'm done trimming. Fits in there the width that I like it. And the top and the bottom, you don't have to trim completely off. You just need to trim it to where it'll fit in with the lens over it. When the top's even with that edge right here, it fits in. Just want it to fit in and fill this area right here between here and here. I just trimmed the top and the bottom off with a dot coat. I've made the wire connections. Next, I'm going to use a piece of heat shrink and go over and cover these up. Forgot one kind of important thing. I will be using a hot glue gun. I'll hot glue the connections where they go into the board, and then I'll hot glue these wires down to this board. Have the heat shrink installed, hot glued all these wires down. Next, I'm going to line this up, put hot glue in all four corners, and then I'm going to mix up some epoxy and put it next to the hot glue once the hot glue's set up to get this located for its final time. I have the epoxy applied. There's our finished product. Drill a hole in the back of the housing, big enough for the ring terminal to fit through. That's your ground. Then I'm gonna hot glue the lens in a few spots, and then I'm gonna test it. If it works okay, go ahead and epoxy it in. So I hot glued it in a few spots. Test it out here. There's your stop. There's your tail. Test fit the lens on. Clears just fine. And this is what we get. There's the stop. And there's the tail. And after I'm done, I will epoxy along this edge and over here and to the bottom, and then on the back side I will epoxy that hole shut, and you can use your sockets to plug the hole up for that big hole. And that should be all.